Welcome to everyone for whom daylight savings did not do you in. Of course, there'll be a nap this afternoon, but you know, that's the way it is. A minister, I dare say, a minister parked his car in a no parking zone in a big city. You know that's a problem. He was short on time and he could not find a space with a meter. So he put a note on the windshield wiper that read, "I have circled this block 10 times. If I don't park here, I'll miss my appointment. Forgive us our trespasses." When he returned, he found a citation from a police officer along with this note. "I've circled this block for 10 years. If I don't give you a ticket, I'll lose my job. Lead us not into temptation." The temptations of Jesus really actually should be called tests, because the word, big mouthful in Greek, parazomenos, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, means testing. Kind of testing that we do to see if a product is pure or if a student has actually studied. It is possible to fail the test by not living up to expectations. The enemy was testing Jesus to see if this incarnate form of God was really up to the job. Was it not possible that the mere fact of human flesh and blood, human weakness, might just tip the scales and undermine God's plan? Could Satan get Jesus to fail? If Satan could find a chink in the armor, a weak point anywhere, then God's plans could be overturned. We are told that Jesus was in the wilderness fasting for 40 days. We don't know if it was a literal 40 days, because 40 is a symbolic number. It is physically possible to fast for 40 days from food. I have actually met a minister who did so. I was not going to follow his example, but hey, he was there, he was thin, and he had survived. But you have to have water. Now, Moses allegedly spent 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai without food or water, which would involve divine intervention in order to be remotely possible. The people of Israel wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. Elijah journeyed for 40 days without food. All of these 40s. 40 was really their way of saying this was a really long time. How long, we're not actually sure, but it's this symbolism that is behind the reason why we celebrate 40 days of Lent. The point is, Jesus was in the wilderness to engage in the ancient spiritual practice of fasting to prepare himself for ministry. He removed every distraction from his life, even food, to focus entirely on God. The 40 days that Jesus spent in the wilderness parallels the 40 years that the people wandered in the wilderness in many interesting and surprising ways. The tests that Jesus experienced are sort of echoes of the kind of testing that the people went through in the wilderness. Although when it comes to these 3 examples, they came at the end of the 40 days. Since this confrontation with evil incarnate came at the end of 40 days of fasting, it is not insignificant, it's perfectly logical that the first test should involve food. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread. Now, at the get-go, notice the underlying tone here. If you are the Son of God. Jesus had been born into a human family. We cannot assume that when he was Luke's age, he knew he was the Son of God. We can't assume that even when he was Aaron and Jack's age, he had entirely figured it out. He probably learned who he was over time. By the time he was 12 in the temple, he had a pretty good idea that he was different because he said, "Don't you know I must be in my Father's house?" when he disappeared. But still, Jesus was brought up in a human family. This small but large word, if, is a wedge. Is this really true, Jesus? Maybe you made it all up. Maybe you're delusional. Maybe you're an egomaniac. The if was followed very swiftly by taking advantage of a human body that was weak by 40 days of fasting and hungry. The stones in the wilderness looked very much like the round loaves of bread that came out of the ovens. In fact, from a distance, you could barely tell the difference. We can just hear Satan's voice now. Don't they look like bread, Jesus? Why don't you just reach out and take what you want? You know you have the power. You can change that into bread. You can feed yourself. You don't need God the Father. You can just do it. Really, don't you want to do it? This is the basic test that we all fail. Not trusting God to provide for our physical needs. It doesn't have to be food. It can be money to pay the bills. We turn away from God and think that we have to do it ourselves. God helps those who help themselves is a really insidious little expression. In Jesus' case, he could do it, but it was vital that he not, because Jesus had to take on humanity and experience life on our terms. The test to trust God for our most basic needs is one that we all know that the Israelites failed in the wilderness. They followed Moses, and they left Egypt, and they were miraculously delivered. But no sooner were they out there than guess what? They were hungry. All their supplies were gone. And Moses had a full-throated rebellion on his hands. They actually said, "We wish we had died by Yahweh's hand back in the land of Egypt when we sat by pots full of meat and ate bread anytime we wanted to. And you've brought us out here in this wilderness so that we'll die." Now, this was a very convenient memory. Life had never been that good in Egypt. In response, God gave them manna. But God also told them, don't collect more than you need for any given day. They were allowed to collect twice as much before the Sabbath, so that on the Sabbath day they could rest. There was a message there. And when they did that, that food stayed good. But if they collected more than they needed on any other day of the week, it turned wormy and foul and nasty. God was making a point. God was trying to teach them to live one day at a time and to trust one day at a time. Jesus dealt with this challenge by using Scripture. And the Scripture he chose directly related to this crisis in the desert over food. Moses reminded the people that God tested them in the wilderness by feeding them manna in order for them to understand who it is that really provides for them. And so Jesus quoted Deuteronomy 8, verse 3, saying, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone." If Jesus had used his divine power to selfishly take care of his own needs, he would have failed in his mission. It was essential that he live in every way as we do, experiencing all of the weaknesses and the hardships of human life. He had to endure real human life, not just the appearance of human life. The second test, according to Luke, involved worldly wealth and power. The devil led Jesus up onto a high place and in an instant showed him all of the kingdoms of the world. He said, "I will give you all their authority and splendor. It has been given to me, and I will give it to you. I can give it to anyone I want to. If you worship me, it will all be yours." About now, we realize that the devil is a politician, because he promises things that he cannot possibly deliver on and has no authority to do so. He is all talk. He makes inflated claims he cannot back up. It has been given to you? Really? By who? And are you sure you didn't just take it? If anyone gave the devil anything, it's us. We give away our rights whenever we sin. It's like dealing with a mafia boss. It's like running a small business and thinking, well, I could make some extra money if I cooperate with the mob here. And as soon as you let the mob in, that small business owner soon discovers that he doesn't run his own business. He is a pawn in a much larger game. Satan was also playing a multifaceted game. Why would we ever expect the devil to tell the truth? People do. When they read the Scripture, they think, well, the devil's telling... Why would you think the devil was telling the truth? First, he reveals the glory and power of numerous kingdoms. Second, he lies about it and says they belong to him, and he can give them to anyone he wants. And third, he says to Jesus, if you bow down and worship me, I will give them to you. Like the devil would ever keep his word in a bargain like that. Oh, did I say kingdoms? Well, maybe I can give you Allentown and Scranton. Upper Darby? Not Lower Merion. Tax bracket is making me too much money in Lower Merion. Jesus was having none of it. Once again, he chose a scripture that related to the time of testing in the wilderness. He quoted Deuteronomy 6:13. It is written, worship the Lord your God only. The context was Moses reminding the people to stand firm and not give in to idolatry. The last temptation involved another if, but it's a really strange one to us. The devil led Jesus to Jerusalem and had him stand on the highest point of the temple and said, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he will give his angels concerning you care. They will lift you up. He will command them. You won't even hurt yourself at all. How much do you believe God, Jesus? If you are the Son of God, you won't even strike your foot against a stone. Now, we don't know if Jesus was literally standing in Jerusalem or whether this was a vision. It sounds literal. And we have to note that here, Satan uses Scripture when he offers the challenge. But why would anyone want to jump off of a building? If you took me to the Empire State Building, the last thing I would want to do is jump off. It is so not happening. But this was a taunt. This was a, do you really believe God? This was another accusation. The devil was challenging Jesus' relationship with God and challenging him to prove it. How sure of yourself are you really, Jesus? Does God really love you? Because you know what? If you can fly down and land in the middle of the temple courtyard, everyone will follow you then. But if you're too chicken to do this, then maybe you don't really believe God. You see, that's how the words are twisted. That's how temptation comes. It's not straightforward. The devil doesn't play fair. Jesus turned and answered quite simply, "It is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Now, it is interesting to note that Jesus didn't argue with the devil. He didn't engage, as we say. As soon as we engage, we give the other position validity. If a newly sober alcoholic is driving by a bar, the internal dialogue should not be, should I go in or not? Because if that's the dialogue, going in is an option. The internal dialogue should be, what meeting should I go to tonight? Mm-hmm. Don't give it space. Don't give it time. The best way to not get hooked is to not bite. Whether the temptation comes to us in a thought or through a person, that's the key. Don't give it room to grow. Jesus used the scriptures for this. For every attempted manipulation against him, he had a concise answer that closed the door. He immediately inserted scripture between himself and the temptation. Now, Jesus knew the scriptures by heart. Anybody here know the scriptures by heart? No takers? The devil does. We have to be aware that the Bible can be used in destructive and hateful ways. And this makes it even more important that we study and know Scripture and that we know it in its right context. Temptation is not a one-dimensional thing. Well, there is that simple form of the chocolate cake or the cookies that you really know you shouldn't take because you're on a diet.
That's Agnes as a girl.
That's Agnes as a little girl? Agnes, did you look like that? I think it's Judy. That's the simple one. But when it comes down to reality, a lot of different mental processes go into making a dreadful mistake, don't they? If someone is trying to manipulate us, they'll use anything that works. Evil doesn't just try to seduce us with cookies. It also berates us and belittles us and undermines our faith until we are vulnerable to suggestion. protecting ourselves against temptation means staying grounded in the truth. An excellent piece of advice that comes from a 12-step fellowship is halt. And this applies to everybody, not just people with addiction problems. Don't get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, because guess what? If any of those things are true, you are going to be vulnerable. And when we look at what happened to Jesus, at least 3 qualify. He might not have been angry, but everything else was going on. Jesus was able to send the devil packing. We're not Jesus. We need to guard ourselves whenever possible in very practical ways. But the author of Hebrews also connects us to Jesus' experience of temptation in another way, describing Jesus as our high priest who intercedes for us on our behalf with the Father, because he has been tempted in every way as we have, and therefore we have a high priest who is able to sympathize with our weaknesses and our struggles, who really knows what it's like to be us. That's amazing. God knows what it is like to be us, has walked where we walk, has struggled with what we struggle. Jesus has dealt with it. Jesus knows how hard it is. And Jesus knows how to help us. He knows what hunger, anger, loneliness, and exhaustion feel like. He has shown us how to resist evil by not engaging it. And he will help us if we let him. We do not have to do this thing called life alone. Amen.